Ever feel like you're drowning in to-dos? Like your inbox is going to explode,
Yeah,
and you
right.
just want to figure out a better way to, actually get things done,
Oh, yeah.
right? Not just like skim the surface.
Yeah.
You're here to, really understand things deeply, efficiently.
And you know what I find fascinating? You see so many people out there who, on the surface, look super successful, right? But deep down, they're wrestling with this feeling that they're not actually effective, like something's missing.
It's so true. And that, I think, is why we're diving into Stephen Covey's 7 Habits today. 7 Habits of highly effective people.
Classic.
Right. I mean, you've probably heard some of these ideas before, but we're going deeper. We're looking at the core principles, those light bulb moments that make these habits stick. Like what Reader said, this book isn't just about business. It's a whole approach to life, a philosophy almost.
And what I appreciate about Covey's approach is it's not about quick fixes or band-aids. It's about understanding the root causes of our behavior, our relationships. It's about building this deep personal discipline.
It really gets at this thing Covey talks about, this inner hunger. Even people who seemingly have it all, there's this yearning. He tells this story, right? About this guy who he crushed it career-wise, achieved all his goals, but then he realized he'd sacrificed his family,
Yeah.
his personal life, and he asks this haunting question: was it worth it?
Wow.
Right? Makes you think hard about what you're really prioritizing.
It really does, and it gets at this crucial idea. Are we aligning our actions with what we truly value? It's so easy to chase those external markers of success, but true effectiveness, that comes from an internal compass, a deeper sense of purpose.
Which brings us to Covey's big idea: paradigms. These are like our mental maps of the world, right?
Yeah.
The lenses we see everything through. It's not just about what we see literally, but our whole framework for understanding things. And these paradigms, they have a huge impact on how we experience reality.
Huge.
He talks about the Pygmalion effect, how our beliefs about others can actually shape their behavior. And he tells this personal story about his own son. He and his wife realized they had this underlying belief that their son was, somehow lacking. And even though they were trying to be supportive, that message was coming through.
Subconsciously.
Yeah, like they needed to shift their own perspective first.
What's so insightful there is how often we mistake our own paradigm for objective truth, right? When someone sees things differently, we immediately think they're wrong. Instead of considering that maybe we're just working with different sets of assumptions.
It's huge. And this leads to a key distinction Covey makes: the personality ethic versus the character ethic. The personality ethic is all about surface stuff, charisma, communication skills, positive attitude. And while those are helpful, Covey argues that true effectiveness comes from the character ethic. It's rooted in deeper principles: fairness, integrity, honesty. Like he uses this analogy of cramming for a test versus the natural growth of a farm. You can't just skip the planting and nurturing and expect a harvest just by cramming at the end, right? It's the same with human development, with relationships. It's got to be built on these deeper principles.
That's such a good analogy. The personality ethic, it's often about outward presentation, whereas the character ethic, it goes to the core of who we are. It's about building from the inside out.
Totally. And there's this great quote: what we are communicates far more eloquently than anything we say or do. It's that silent influence that has the real impact. So in our deep dive, we'll be exploring a few key areas: paradigms and how they shift, this idea of a principle-centered paradigm, the balance between what we produce and our ability to produce, what Covey calls the PPC balance, the move from dependence to independence, the private victory, then on to interdependence, the public victory, and finally this process of constant renewal.
It's quite a journey, and it all starts with understanding ourselves. Then it extends out to how we interact with the world, with everyone around us.
So let's start with dependence to independence, the private victory. This is all about the first 3 habits. The first one is be proactive. Now, we've all heard this before. What are the more nuanced aspects of really living proactively?
Right. Well, at its core, proactivity is about recognizing that space between what happens to us, the stimulus, and how we choose to respond. That gap, that's where our freedom lies. Viktor Frankl's experience in the Nazi concentration camps, that's a a stark example of this. Even in that horrific situation, he held on to the freedom to choose his attitude. And what we often find is that this freedom, it can feel so small, so limited. In our daily lives, we're bombarded with things, notifications, demands. It's easy to feel like we are just reacting. A key insight here is learning to create even just small pockets of space, like 5 minutes to just breathe and to consciously choose your response instead of defaulting to those old
Those
patterns.
little pockets of space, that's so important. And Covey emphasizes those unique human gifts we have that enable proactivity. Self-awareness, thinking about our own thinking, imagination, envisioning possibilities, conscience, our inner moral compass, and independent will, actually acting based on our values, not just our impulses.
And so often we kind of diminish these gifts, especially our independent will. Reactive people, they're super influenced by their environment, by the weather around them. A bad day at work ruins their whole evening. A critical comment throws them off track. But proactive people, they're guided by their values. Their commitment to a project, it's not dictated by their mood or someone else's feedback.
It reminds me of that story about Carol, Covey's friend. She was facing a terminal illness. And even in those last months, she chose to focus her energy on writing personal histories for her kids, like focusing on what she could control, the legacy she wanted to leave. It's such a powerful reminder to focus on our circle of influence, even when things are tough.
Absolutely. And even the language people use reveals a lot. Reactive people, they say things like, I have to go to this meeting, or I can't finish this report because of X. It's like they're giving up responsibility. Proactive language, it's different. It's about choice. I choose to go to this meeting because it aligns with my priorities, or I will find a way to finish this report despite the challenges. Covey tells this story about a student. He said he had to go on a tennis trip. And just by asking, do you have to or do you choose to, the student realized, oh, yeah, I'm actually choosing this.
That shift in language is so powerful, and it leads to the circle of concern and circle of influence. Our circle of concern is like everything we care about. Our circle of influence is what we can actually do something about. Proactive people focus their energy on that circle of influence, their own actions, their direct impact. He gives the example of this manager who seemed really controlling. But then an employee started proactively offering solutions, insights, and the manager's circle of influence actually expanded because of that.
Right. It's showing how taking initiative, even in our own little sphere, can ripple outwards. And even with past mistakes, right? Those are in our circle of concern. But being proactive means focusing on how we respond now, how we learn, how we make amends. That's all in our circle of influence.
We can't change the past, but we can absolutely control how we react to it. And one key to developing proactivity, making and keeping commitments, even small ones. Covey suggests this 30-day test. Like pick one area and practice being proactive for 30 days straight.
Building that muscle. Proving to yourself that you can follow through. It's those consistent choices that build up to bigger things.
So true. Okay, so we're taking ownership of our choices. Now, habit 2, begin with the end in mind. Now, this sounds like goal setting, but how is Covey's approach different?
It definitely includes goals, but it's more about clarifying your purpose, your direction. He has this powerful visualization exercise. Picture your own funeral a few years from now. Imagine the people speaking, family, friends, colleagues. What do you want them to say about you? The kind of person you were? What values do you want them to remember?
Whoa, intense imagery.
Right, but it forces you to confront what really matters. Covey says begin with the end in mind means using that vision, that ultimate end, as a framework for everything else. He tells the story about someone asking how much a deceased friend left behind, and the answer was, he left it all. What's your all? What are you leaving behind?
Deep. And he talks about how everything is created twice. First in our minds, like a blueprint, then in reality, the tangible outcome. It's like designing a building. The architect has the plans way before the first brick is laid. Begin with the end in mind is about creating that mental blueprint for your life based on your values.
Makes sense.
And he makes this crucial distinction between leadership and management. He quotes Drucker and Venice. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Management is about efficiency, getting things done. But leadership, it's about setting the direction, making sure we're even on the right path in the first place. He uses this great analogy, a group of producers hacking through the jungle with machetes. Super efficient, right? But is anyone making sure they're even in the right jungle? That's leadership.
We need both, in organizations and in our own lives. It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, just checking things off the list. But without that clarity of purpose, without that leadership, Are we even moving in the right direction?
This leads to re-scripting, becoming the author of our own lives. We often operate on these scripts we inherit from our families, society, our past, but through self-awareness, imagination, conscience, we can rewrite those scripts. Covey talks about Anwar Sadat, who fundamentally changed his view of Israel, a huge shift that led to major geopolitical changes.
That's powerful. Recognizing those narratives we've internalized and then choosing a new one based on deeper understanding. We all have those areas where we're running on outdated scripts.
We get so caught up in what Covey calls the thick of thin things. We might value family, for instance, but constantly prioritize work deadlines over family time. Our actions don't always match our values.
That's just so relatable.
Right. So by really examining those values, we can spate the gaps between what we say we believe and what we actually do, and then start re-scripting.
And Covey talks about these ineffective life centers, things people build their lives around: spouse, family, money, work, even friends or enemies, or ultimately themselves. He points out the problems with each, like basing your self-worth solely on your spouse makes a relationship so fragile, or being driven by money that leads to neglecting other parts of your life.
He tells this story about a father who chose to take his kids to the circus instead of going to a work event, like recognizing that those moments with his kids were precious and fleeting. It's about aligning your actions with what you truly value. But then he contrasts that with a workaholic. Their whole identity is tied to their job, which makes them super vulnerable to any setbacks.
Because those external things, they're not a stable foundation for security or guidance or wisdom. Someone who bases their worth on what others think, they're constantly on this emotional roller coaster. They're always trying to please everyone else.
It's exhausting. And it leads to Covey's idea of the principle-centered paradigm. He says the most stable way to live is by centering your life on timeless principles, like fairness, integrity, honesty, service. These provide an internal compass, offering security that doesn't depend on external circumstances or emotions. He goes back to that scenario of a conflict between a kid's concert and a work obligation, and he shows how a principle-centered person might approach it, thinking about both responsibility and family values and finding a better solution.
It's not about neglecting one thing for another. It's about grounding all your decisions in these enduring truths.
And a key tool for defining this end in mind, aligning your life with those principles, is a personal mission statement.
Yes.
This isn't just a corporate thing. It's about articulating your core values, your purpose, your North Star.
Even the process of writing it can be so transformative. It makes you think deeply about what you stand for. And once you have that, you can then look at all the roles you play in your life: parent, partner, professional, and set goals that actually align with that mission.
Which brings us to habit 3. Put first things first. This is where the rubber meets the road. We've taken responsibility, we've got our direction. Now, how do we actually manage our time to get there?
It's the practical application of the first two habits. Covey reminds us of the difference between leadership, that visionary work, and management, the actual execution.
And he introduces the time management matrix. It categorizes activities based on their urgency and importance. Quadrant Ben is urgent and important. Crises, problems that need immediate attention. Quadrant Third is urgent, but not important. Interruptions, some meetings. Quadrant Fourth is neither urgent nor important. Time wasters. But the key is Quadrant 2. Things that are important but not urgent. Proactive work, prevention, relationship building.
Quadrant 2, that's where most people get tripped up. It's so easy to get stuck reacting to those urgent things in Quadrant 1, the crises. But Covey says effectiveness comes from dedicating time to Quadrant 2. It's about prioritizing those things that have the biggest long-term impact, even if they don't feel urgent right now. He tells the story of Sandra declining a big project so she could spend uninterrupted time with her kids. It takes courage to say no to even good things so you can say yes to the best things. So true. And that often means saying no to the urgent but not important stuff in Quadrant 3 and the distractions in Quadrant 4. Without that internal compass, without commitment to those long-term goals, it's so easy to get swept up in the whirlwind of the everyday.
Absolutely. And Covey talks about those first 3 generations of time management tools, to-do lists, calendars, more complex systems. While helpful, they often lack that principle-centered focus. They can make you feel controlled by the schedule instead of you being in control of your priorities.
And this leads to the 4th generation approach. It's principle-centered and focuses on managing your week, not just your day. It's using your mission as your compass, guiding your time and energy toward those Quadrant 2 activities, creating balance, long-term effectiveness.
And a big part of this is delegation. Covey differentiates between gopher delegation, which is micromanaging, and stewardship delegation, which focuses on results and empowers people.
Stewardship delegation, I like that. It's about clear understanding in 5 areas: desired results, guidelines, resources, accountability for outcomes, and consequences, good and bad. He talks about delegating yard work to his son, initially falling into that gopher trap, then realizing the power of letting his son own it, trusting him to figure it out.
Giving him that ownership, yeah.
And that trust, that's everything. It fosters initiative, develops competence. It's not just about doing things efficiently, it's about true effectiveness.
So we've covered the private victory, taking ownership of our choices, defining our mission, prioritizing. Now it shifts to success with others, the public victory. Which brings us to habit 4, think win-win. But first, Covey introduces a really important concept.
The emotional bank account.
Oh yeah.
It's a metaphor for the trust in a relationship. We make deposits through kindness, keeping promises, understanding, paying attention to the little things, showing integrity. Withdrawals happen when we break promises, disrespect, or inconsiderate. The balance in this account influences everything.
It's like that buffer of trust. It allows for hiccups without ruining the relationship. Okay, so habit 4, think win-win. What's the essence of this?
It's a mindset of seeking mutual benefit in all interactions. Solutions where everyone feels good, committed to making it work. It's cooperative, not competitive. Covey says we're often conditioned to think win-lose, like someone else's success takes away from ours. But he says that's limiting. Win-win is about abundance. There's enough for everyone to succeed.
He also talks about win-win or no deal. If you can't find a mutually beneficial solution, you're willing to walk away. It frees you from manipulation and allows for honest exploration. He gives an example of a band where the leader used this approach. Everyone had to feel good about the creative choices.
It's liberating having that no-deal option. It allows for genuine openness, collaboration. You need courage to stand up for your needs and consideration for others' needs. And of course, a healthy emotional bank account makes win-win much easier.
And he contrasts win-win with the scarcity mentality. This idea that there's only so much success or happiness to go around. It leads to comparison, wanting others to fail.
Yeah. The scarcity mentality kills collaboration, creativity. The abundance mentality is the opposite. It fosters those things.
Now, Covey does say not every interaction needs to be a perfect win-win, especially in strong relationships where that emotional bank account is high.
Sometimes you just need to ask for support, make a decision, and the other person understands.
Makes sense. But in ongoing things, collaborations, win-win is the way to go. Covey tells a story about a bank training program. They were resistant to this new approach, but then they established clear criteria, win-win agreements, and everyone felt heard.
And those win-win agreements, they should outline consequences, good and bad, up front. That creates clarity, prevents misunderstandings, like the agreement Covey made with his daughter about using the family car. Aligning reward systems is also key. If you're encouraging collaboration, but the rewards are all about individual competition, well, you're going to get mixed results. He talks about this real estate organization. They had this misaligned system, and they had to rework it to benefit everyone.
So we're aiming for win-win. Next up, habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Sounds simple, but this is where things get tricky.
It is. Covey uses this optometrist analogy. You wouldn't want someone prescribing glasses without checking your vision, right?
Yeah.
But we do that all the time in communication. We jump to solutions before truly understanding the other person.
And he introduces empathic listening, listening with your ears, eyes, and heart, trying to get the content and the feeling behind it. It's not about autobiographical listening, where we filter everything through our own experiences, constantly evaluating, advising. He has this great example of a father and son talking about school. The dad's trying to help, but he keeps responding from his own experience, and the conversation shuts down.
Classic. We project our own stuff onto others all the time. Covey outlines 4 levels of listening: ignoring, pretending, selective listening, and then empathic listening. It's actively rephrasing what you hear, reflecting the feelings back to the person.
Making sure you truly get it.
Right. And when we do that, it creates what Covey calls psychological air. It builds trust, makes the other person feel heard, and it often helps them process their own thoughts and emotions. But that desire to understand has to be genuine. Just using techniques without empathy, that can backfire.
Because it feels fake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seeking first to understand, it can transform a transaction into a real connection. Instead of just solving a problem, we're building something deeper. He says sometimes understanding even goes beyond words.
He has this story about a negotiating team. They were butting heads. The president just just sat and listened to their proposal, paraphrasing, reflecting, and it completely shifted the dynamic. It became collaborative.
That's powerful.
Right. And he ties this to the Greek idea of ethos, credibility, pathos, empathy, and logos, logic. He says in communication, you got to establish credibility and connect with the other person's feelings before presenting your logic. He tells the story of a manager who refused to adapt his style to his boss.
Stubborn.
Yeah. And it didn't go well. So seeking to understand, that's in our circle of influence, and it makes huge deposits in that emotional bank account.
It's the foundation for strong relationships and for getting to win-win.
Okay, so we're striving for win-win. We're seeking to understand. Now we get to habit 6, synergize. What's this about?
Synergy is about creating a third alternative. It's not a compromise. It's a solution that's better than what anyone came up with individually. It's combining different perspectives to get to something truly exceptional. Covey says synergistic communication is being open to new possibilities, trusting that together you can achieve something greater.
Valuing those differences, believing that collaboration can lead to something more innovative, more effective. But he does say many people haven't experienced true synergy because they're stuck in defensive communication. There's a lack of trust.
And trust is so essential for synergy. Covey tells this amazing story about a university class that had this spontaneous, synergistic learning experience. They had trust, respect, openness, and they were all driven by this shared desire to learn. And they built on each other's ideas in this remarkable way.
Wow. When it clicks, it clicks.
But he also points out that even situations that are almost synergistic can crumble if trust breaks down, like administrators making restrictive rules based on the actions of a few, or business partners creating overly legalistic agreements that stifle creativity.
Yeah, that kills it.
Synergy often requires courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to share your authentic self, to face those tough truths head on. He tells the story of a company meeting. They were learning and practicing these habits, and suddenly people started opening up, sharing their real concerns, and it led to this breakthrough understanding of their challenges.
That vulnerability is so key.
It is, and it seems like the combination of that high emotional account, the win-win mindset, and that commitment to understanding, that creates the perfect conditions for synergy. He uses the example of a couple planning a vacation. By really listening to each other, believing in that third alternative, they come up with a plan that's better than either of their original ideas.
Makes total sense.
And being principle-centered, that actually fosters wholeness. It integrates our logical thinking with our creativity, which unlocks synergy. Covey talks about this couple he had lunch with. They were struggling to communicate, and it was because they had different dominant brain styles.
Like they were wired differently.
Right. But they could overcome that by valuing those differences. And he uses the old woman, young lady illusion to illustrate this. Different people literally see things differently. And valuing those different perspectives, that's how you get to synergy, to those innovative solutions.
It's not about being right. It's about recognizing the validity of multiple viewpoints.
Exactly. And he uses the parable of the animals in school, where the duck can't run and the rabbit can't swim. It shows the limitations of a one-size-fits-all approach. Synergy recognizes and values everyone's unique strengths. He also talks about force field analysis, how synergy can increase those driving forces and reduce the restraining forces to achieve a goal.
He gives a couple more examples, too. One about these feuding parties and their lawyers. They finally reached a resolution by focusing on these habits of interdependence. And another about a land developer and a bank overcoming obstacles to create a mutually beneficial deal.
It shows how synergy can transform even the most complex situations.
So we've gone from dependence to independence to interdependence. Now we're at habit 7, sharpen the saw. What's that all about?
This is personal PC, production capability. It's about investing in yourself, enhancing your greatest asset. And it involves renewing yourself in 4 dimensions: physical, spiritual, mental, and social-emotional. Covey points out that pretty much every philosophy of life in some way emphasizes these areas.
Let's break those down. First, physical renewal.
That's about taking care of your body. Exercise, nutrition, rest. Covey talks about the importance of a program that builds endurance, flexibility, strength. He even shares a weightlifter's perspective, talking about how you have to push those muscles to the point of tearing for them to grow. But the biggest impact of exercise, he says, is how it reinforces our proactivity.
From habit 1.
Yep. When we act on our value of health, it boosts our self-esteem, our integrity.
Next, spiritual renewal. Seems very personal.
It is. It's about connecting with your values, your purpose, what inspires you. For Covey, it's prayer and meditation. For others, it might be nature, reading, music, service. He tells a story about a doctor who prescribed a day at the beach, focusing on serving others and letting go of worries.
Wow, I love that.
Right. It's a reminder that spiritual renewal provides leadership in our lives. It aligns us with our values, guides our choices. Like habit 2, begin with the end in mind. Then we have mental renewal.
Keep those brains sharp.
Exactly. It's continuous learning and growth. Reading, writing, thinking critically. Covey talks about how too much passive entertainment, like TV, can hinder mental development. And he stresses the importance of self-management from habit 3 to choose enriching activities.
So being intentional with our choices. And finally, social emotional renewal. This seems tied to interdependence.
It is. It's about habits 4, 5, and 6, building and maintaining healthy relationships. Covey talks about the security that comes from serving others, from contributing. He references Viktor Frankl and Dr. Hans Selye. He also talks about scripting others positively, recognizing and affirming their proactive nature, their worth.
I like that, scripting others positively.
It's powerful. And, neglecting any of these dimensions can impact the others, create imbalance.
Like they're all connected.
Yeah, they reinforce each other. Physical health can boost mental clarity, spiritual well-being. And a strong social emotional life is often fueled by that personal integrity we develop through the other dimensions.
Covey calls dedicating time to renewal each day the daily private victory. He says it's key to integrating all the 7 habits.
And that daily private victory sets us up for the daily public victory in our interactions. We approach things with that abundance mentality, value differences, work towards those synergistic win-win solutions.
He ends habit 7 by saying self-awareness means choosing your guiding principles. And there are no shortcuts to effectiveness. It's like the law of the harvest. You reap what you sow. And he shares this realization he had about the power in that space between stimulus and response. So the key to growth, happiness.
That space is the foundation of it all, isn't it? That's where our freedom to choose lies.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into 7 habits, we see how these themes connect. Paradigms and how they shift. Character as the basis for success. The journey from dependence to interdependence. That PPC balance. And the constant need for renewal.
It all comes back to proactivity, choosing our response, aligning our lives with those timeless principles.
Covey also shares this story about his year of deep communication with his wife, Sandra. They have this agreement. No probing. It created a safe space for vulnerability, and it helped them uncover deeper issues. And he touches on family relationships, talking about giving our kids both roots and wings.
Those personal stories really bring it all to life.
So for you, our listener, as you navigate life, think about that space between stimulus and response. How can you choose your reactions to create the outcomes you want? Real change often starts with a shift in perspective, a commitment to growth. And this deep dive, well, it's just the beginning of that larger journey.
The beginning.
The beginning.